From the moment we are old enough to really understand the world, we are told in a million subtle and honestly not so subtle ways that we're fighting a war.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A war on multiple fronts.
Yeah, and it feels completely exhausting.
Yeah.
You listening right now, just think about it. We are constantly battling against entropy.
Right.
We're fighting against aging, against our bodies breaking down. We fight against the decay of our homes, the breakdown of our social circle.
The inevitable slide of the entire universe into cold, dark chaos.
Exactly. It is the standard, totally accepted narrative of existence.
It really is. It's this, fundamental thrumming anxiety that underpins almost everything human beings do.
Yeah, that thrumming anxiety.
There's this pervasive, honestly terrifying idea that the universe is essentially a delicate sandcastle we've somehow managed to build.
And time is the ocean tide.
Right. Time is the tide, steadily coming in to wash it all away.
Yeah.
So what do? We desperately pack the sand tighter and tighter.
We build seawalls.
We build seawalls. We buy anti-aging creams. We create these incredibly rigid laws. We do everything we can just to survive the incoming wave.
It's exhausting. But, what if that entire premise, that foundational anxiety we all carry around, is completely upside down?
That is the big question.
What if the actual enemy, the only real threat to existence, to progress, and frankly, to you as an individual navigating your life, is something entirely different?
That is the exact, massive paradigm shift we're going to be exploring today.
Yeah, and it's a big one.
We are diving into this fascinating theoretical essay appropriately titled, "The Only Thing We're Fighting Against."
Such a great title.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say right up front, it challenges some of the most basic bedrock assumptions we hold about how reality itself operates.
It really asks us to look at the very physics of our universe and our own psychology through a completely different lens.
Which is not easy to do.
No, it's not. When I first read through the notes for this deep dive, it felt dense. It's incredibly provocative, and it reads almost like a grand unifying theory of the universe.
It definitely has that ambition.
But the mission for this deep dive isn't to just, throw high-level physics jargon at you. We want to unpack this text.
Right, translate it.
Exactly. Translate its incredibly complex ideas about time, thermodynamics, and human society into something that actually makes sense for your daily life.
We're looking for those profound, mind-bending aha moments hiding inside the theory.
And there are a lot of them.
So many. But to do that, to even begin to grasp what this author is presenting, we have to start by completely discarding the idea of the universe as a machine with breakable laws.
Okay, discarding the machine metaphor.
Right. If you picture the universe as a clockwork mechanism that's slowly winding down and rusting, you're going to completely miss the point.
So what are we looking at instead?
What we're looking at today is a vision of the universe as a breathing fractal engine.
A breathing fractal engine.
Yes. A dynamic system of constant, necessary, and beautiful motion.
Okay, I love that imagery. But let's figure out how this engine actually works. Because the source material hits us immediately with a massive, incredibly counterintuitive claim.
It really doesn't hold back.
It doesn't. It argues that two concepts, coherence and decoherence, are actually the exact same thing.
Which is wild.
I have to be honest, my initial reaction was just, no, they aren't. They intuitively sound like absolute opposites.
Of course they do.
Cohering means coming together, and decohering means breaking apart. How on earth can they be the same thing?
Well, it sounds like a paradox because of how we experience them from our, extremely limited human perspective.
Right, because we experience life linearly.
Exactly. But the text argues that structurally, mathematically, coherence and decoherence differ only in direction, in scale, orientation, and perspective.
So it's a matter of relativity.
It's entirely a matter of relativity.
Okay, you're going to have to break that down for me.
Yeah.
Because if I drop a glass on the floor and it shatters, it decohered. It broke.
Right.
If I glue it back together, I'm making it cohere. Those are fundamentally different actions with completely different results.
Sure. But let's shift the framing away from a broken glass.
Okay.
Because that brings in our inherent bias of destruction. Let's look at it through a biological and social lens instead.
I think that will help, yeah.
The text uses this beautiful analogy of the seasons to explain this relativity, and it's incredibly profound. It suggests that cohering, in a societal sense, is our summer self.
Right, our outward expression.
Yes. Your summer self is when you're engaging with the world. You're building relationships. You're collaborating on a project at work. You're going to parties.
You're actively participating in the economy.
Exactly. In the language of the essay, You are cohering with society.
Hmm.
You're acting as a node,
Yeah.
forming connections in a massive outward-facing network.
I get that. That feels like growth. We like that.
We do.
But then the text says that decohering from society-like, pulling back to focus on our inner world, is our winter self.
Yes, the winter self.
And this is where I really want to push on this concept. Because modern society heavily, heavily stigmatizes the winter self.
Oh, without a doubt.
If you, as a listener, decide to pull back, if you retreat, if you stop producing and answering emails, and start just being alone and reflecting,
People start to worry.
they panic, they ask if you're depressed, they ask if you're failing or falling behind your peers.
We view decoherence from the group as a purely negative thing.
So if they are mathematically and structurally the exact same thing, why does one feel like glorious, celebrated growth and the other feels like a shameful withdrawal?
That gets right to the heart of the illusion of our perspective. Why does it feel different? Because we are inherently biased toward the scale of society.
Because we live in it.
Right.
Yeah.
But think about the mechanics of what's actually happening when you withdraw. When you decohere from the external society, you aren't just turning into nothing.
I'm not just vanishing.
You're taking all of that outward-directed energy and you're using it to cohere your inner self.
Wait, say that again? Decohering outwardly is cohering inwardly.
Exactly. It's a shift in scale and direction. You weren't breaking apart. You're simply building a different structure on a smaller internal scale.
Oh, wow.
When you retreat into your winter self, you're organizing your thoughts. You're processing your traumas.
Solidifying your identity.
Yes. Reading, resting, healing. You are creating a massive, complex coherence of your internal world.
So what looks like decoherence to the outside world?
Is actually hypercoherence on the inside.
Ah, okay. That is a massive perspective shift. So I'm just changing the vector of my energy.
Precisely. You're changing the vector. Think of it like breathing, which is the foundational metaphor we need to keep coming back to today.
Okay, breathing.
Cohering outwardly is breathing out, exhaling, pushing your breath into the room.
But you obviously can't constantly breathe out.
You can't. The system, the engine of your body and the engine of the universe requires you to breathe in.
And breathing in is the decoherence from the room, pulling the air back into the internal structure of the lungs.
Yes. And here's the crucial part. Once that inner world becomes coherent, once it's highly structured, rested, and strong, because of that winter period.
Only then can you expand outward again.
And exactly.
Yeah.
You can go back into the summer and cohere with society in ways you absolutely couldn't have before because you now have a stronger, more complex internal foundation to connect from.
You know, that reframes so much of our daily guilt. Think about that for a second.
It really does.
When you feel that deep, desperate, almost physical need to disconnect from the noise of the world, to turn off your phone, retreat into your room, and just be alone.
You aren't failing at life.
You aren't breaking the social contract or falling behind. You're simply shifting your scale. You're doing the mathematical work required to build internal coherence.
It's winter.
It's winter. I love that.
And winter is not the death of the forest. We often look at bare trees and think the forest is dying.
Yeah.
But it isn't. Winter is the active, vital consolidation of resources necessary for the spring. The text explicitly states that our linear perspective of moving through time tricks us into believing that inward and outward are fundamentally different phenomena.
Well, they aren't.
They aren't. They're the same force, just pointing in different directions. They are the piston moving up and down. They are the engine.
Okay, I buy the breathing analogy. It's comforting, actually. It removes the moral judgment from our natural rhythm.
It really does.
But if this constant cycle of expanding and contracting, this entirely natural shifting between summer and winter, is the very engine of existence, why does the author say we are in a war?
Yeah.
Because if the engine just runs itself, how does it break? What are we actually supposed to be worried about here?
That is the perfect question, and it takes us to the true core of this essay.
Lay it on me.
If the universe is a breathing engine, the only actual danger to the system is whatever stops the breath.
Okay.
The text states explicitly, and I quote, "Incoherence is the thing that we fight against." Full stop.
Incoherence. But wait, we just established that decoherence pulling apart is natural and necessary. So how is incoherence different from decoherence?
This is a vital distinction. Decoherence is a directional shift of energy. It's breathing in.
Right.
Incoherence is a structural failure. The text defines incoherence very specifically as a lack of information, a lack of connection, or fundamentally misaligned nodes.
So it's not just chaos.
No, it's the breakdown of the engine's ability to transfer energy back and forth.
Okay, so how does that breakdown happen? What does incoherence actually look like in this theoretical model?
The author outlines two very distinct, almost opposite ways that a system can become incoherent. And understanding these two extremes is crucial to understanding everything else in the essay.
I'm tracking. What are the two ways?
The first way is through extreme rigidity, or what the text calls the crystallization of the system.
Crystallization, okay.
The second way is through an expansion that breaks connections, where the space between the nodes becomes simply too vast.
So we can break the universe's engine by holding on too tightly or by spreading out too far?
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanics of the outward expansion first. Imagine you're in your summer phase. You're expanding your social network.
I'm cohering with society, making connections, forming nodes.
Right. But what happens if you try to continue that outward expansion forever without ever stopping to breathe in?
I suppose I'd just get completely exhausted. I'd burn out.
Right, but look at it structurally. If you try to be best friends with a million people, spreading your energy, your time, and your attention thinner and thinner across the globe.
Eventually, the connection points that actually make up me begin to dissolve.
Yes. You lose your core identity. The space between your nodes, your relationships, your thoughts becomes too vast for information to travel across.
The system breaks.
You incohere because of too much expansion. The rubber band stretches until it snaps.
I have definitely felt that frantic feeling of being stretched so thin that you don't even know who you are anymore.
We all have.
That's the snapping rubber band form of incoherence. What about the other side, the crystallization?
We'll look at the inward movement. You decohere from society to build your inner winter self. You pull back.
Right.
But if you go inward too much, if you isolate completely and indefinitely, what happens?
I guess I stopped taking in new information from the outside world.
You stop forming new nodes with other people. Your internal structure becomes entirely rigid. You literally crystallize.
And a crystal isn't a breathing engine.
Exactly. A crystal is highly structured, yes.
Yeah.
It looks organized, but it cannot change. It cannot adapt. It cannot breathe. It is stuck.
Wow.
Both the snapped rubber band and the frozen crystal are states of incoherence because the dynamic flow of information and connection to the back and forth oscillation has completely ceased.
This becomes incredibly profound when you apply it to human behavior and society.
It really does.
Because the text doesn't just leave this as an abstract physics concept, it boldly equates this structural incoherence with things we experience socially every day.
Specifically, it calls out artificial scarcity and fear.
Right. This is where the physics of the text translates directly, almost violently, into psychology and sociology.
Let's talk about fear first. Fear is the ultimate crystallizing agent.
Let me push back on that for a second.
Go ahead.
Because when I think of a crowd of people who are terrified, I think of panic. I think of people scattering in a million different directions, chaotic and unstructured.
Sure.
That feels like the snapped rubber band, not a rigid crystal. How does the text reconcile fear with crystallization?
It's a great observation, but you have to look past the immediate physical reaction and look at the structural result.
Okay, what's the structural result?
Yes, a panicked crowd scatters physically. But what happens to their internal structures? When we are deeply afraid, we pull back neurologically and sociologically.
Rebuild walls.
We reject new information because the unknown is perceived as a threat. We retreat into extremely rigid tribal identities. We become dogmatic. Us versus them.
Oh, I see. We lose our nuance and our flexibility.
We freeze into defensive postures. That is crystallization. The society might scatter into factions, but those factions are rigid, unbreathing crystals incapable of taking in new perspectives.
Fear causes structural incoherence by freezing the nodes.
Exactly.
Wow, okay, that makes total sense. We become ideologically crystallized. We stop breathing in new ideas.
Exactly.
And what about artificial scarcity? How does that cause incoherence?
Artificial scarcity causes the other type of incoherence, the snapping of the rubber band.
The overexpansion.
Right. Scarcity breaks societal connections by creating too much space between the nodes. Think about it.
If there isn't enough to go around.
Or more accurately, in our modern world, if we are told and convinced there isn't enough to go around, what happens?
We stop cooperating.
Yes. The societal bonds that connect us stretch and stretch as we compete for resources until they snap.
The community breaks apart into isolated, disconnected islands.
The distance between us becomes too vast for empathy or collaboration to cross.
That is so deeply relevant to the world right now.
It really is.
Yeah.
Whether it's fear freezing us into ideological crystals or artificial scarcity blowing us apart into isolated, fiercely competitive islands, the structural result is identical.
The engine of coherence and decoherence stops.
The breathing stops. The system cannot process information. That is what incoherence is.
And according to this text, that is the only true enemy we should be fighting against.
Only one.
But wait, this brings up a huge problem with our perspective. Because if fear and scarcity make us misinterpret reality, how do we even know when something is actually incoherent?
That's the trick, isn't it?
There is a detail hidden in this section of the text that I found strangely comforting, but also really confusing. It points out that sometimes what looks like catastrophic incoherence to us is actually just a phase change viewed from the wrong scale.
Yes.
What does that mean?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it requires us to fundamentally question our own panic responses. The text is warning us that our perspective is so limited that we often mistake natural, necessary transformations for the end of the world.
Give me an example of that.
Think about a caterpillar turning into a butterfly inside a chrysalis. We've all learned this basic biology, but think about it structurally.
Okay.
Inside that cocoon, the caterpillar releases enzymes that literally dissolve its own body. It turns into a nutrient-rich biological soup.
Gross, but true.
Now, imagine you are a cell belonging to the caterpillar's old immune system. From your scale, from your perspective, this event looks like the ultimate terrifying incoherence.
Right. My entire universe is melting, the connections are breaking, it's the apocalypse.
Absolute destruction. To the caterpillar cell, that is total incoherence.
But it's not.
No. If you zoom out, if you change your scale and look at the system from the outside, you realize it isn't incoherence at all. The system isn't breaking, it's shifting to a different phase.
The biological material is simply decohering at one specific scale so that it can cohere into a vastly different, more complex scale. A butterfly.
Exactly.
So the breakdown isn't an error, it's a requirement.
And the text suggests we do this in our own lives constantly. We look at a situation, maybe a long-term relationship ending, or a massive career shift, or even a societal institution crumbling, and we panic.
We feel like the world is ending because it looks like incoherence.
It looks like our nodes are breaking. But often, it's just the necessary decoherence required to build a new, more complex structure. The danger isn't the soup phase.
What is the danger, then?
The danger is if the soup freezes.
Oh.
If fear sets in during the transition and crystallizes the soup, you never get the butterfly.
Oh.
Or if artificial scarcity makes the chrysalis burst open prematurely, the rubber band snaps.
The danger is actual incoherence halting the natural phase change.
Exactly.
This naturally leads us into some really deep, almost mind-bending waters in the SO.
It does. It gets heavily into the physics here.
Because if this cycle of breathing in and out is constantly pushing outward and pulling inward, what happens when we push this cycle to its absolute physical limits?
Right, because if the universe is an engine, engines have red lines.
They do. And this brings us to a concept the text borrows from dynamical systems theory called a limit cycle.
Yes, the limit cycle.
Now, for you listening, dynamical systems theory can get incredibly math-heavy. But essentially, a limit cycle basically means there are boundaries to behavior.
There's a mathematical limit to how much a system can cohere outward or decohere inward before the fundamental rules of the game change.
The author posits that the entire universe operates on these limit cycles fractally at every single level of reality.
At every scale.
And the most fascinating, challenging part of this entire essay is how the author describes what happens at those extreme edges.
This is where it gets really fun.
When a system pushes all the way to the absolute edge of a limit cycle, it doesn't just bounce back smoothly. It undergoes a phase change.
Like the caterpillar to the butterfly, but on a cosmic physics level.
Let's break down the two extremes mentioned in the text, because honestly, I had to read this section 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating.
It's a lot to take in.
It talks about the absolute extremes of both outward and inward movement. Let's start with extreme outward movement.
Okay.
The text says that when outward expansion, when coherence goes so incredibly far that the connection points stretch beyond their physical limits, the system dissolves.
Yes.
It says things appear to return to the substrate, and the author calls this entropy.
This is a radical, almost heretical reframing of entropy in the world of physics.
Explain why. Because I was always taught that entropy is the ultimate bad guy.
We all are.
It's the second law of thermodynamics. It's the idea that everything is slowly, inevitably degrading into heat death. The coffee gets cold, the building crumbles, the stars burn out.
Yes, in classical thermodynamics, entropy is the villain of the universe's story. It is the inevitable slide toward chaos and nothingness.
But this text disagrees.
It strips away that negative moral judgment entirely. It views entropy simply as the extreme necessary edge of outward expansion.
Just a phase change.
It's the phase change that happens when the cosmic rubber band stretches so far that a specific object or system dissolves back into the foundational stuff of the universe, the substrate.
So entropy isn't the universe dying, it's just the universe recycling its Legos.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's the return to the baseline so that new coherence can eventually emerge.
That is so cool.
But as mind-bending as that is, it is the other extreme that is truly staggering.
Mm.
Let's look at extreme inward force, extreme decoherence.
Okay, yes. This is the part that broke my brain. Walk me through this carefully.
I will try.
The text says that when things become so incredibly dense from inward force, when they pull inward and decohere from everything else until the pressure is absolute, they break out of the circular limit cycle.
Yes.
The circle breaks into what appears to be a straight line. And this phase change creates particles that move faster than light.
Right.
Hold on. Stop the show right there. Faster than light.
I know.
We are taught that the speed of light is the absolute speed limit of the universe. It is a fundamental constant. What does the author mean here? Are they saying light isn't the limit?
We need to contextualize what the author is doing here.
Please do.
They're using theoretical physics, specifically the fringes of quantum mechanics and relativity, to illustrate a profound philosophical point about the nature of reality.
Okay.
In the mathematical framework of this essay, when inward pressure decoherence becomes absolute, it shatters the normal 3D physical lattice that we exist in.
It shatters it.
It's a phase change so violent that it creates a straight line of pure momentum. But the truly revolutionary idea here isn't just about theoretical, faster-than-light particles. It's what the text says about light itself.
Right. The text argues that the existence of light itself is a form of incoherence. That is an incredibly wild claim. Light is incoherence. How does that work?
Think about the definition of incoherence we established earlier. A lack of connection, or nodes that are misaligned because they've broken away from the system.
Okay, right.
According to the extreme logic of this essay, a photon, a particle of light, is energy that has experienced a phase change so massive that it's broken free from the standard limit cycle of resting matter.
It broke the circle.
Yes, it is a straight line of pure momentum shooting across the universe. Because it's moving at the absolute speed limit of our physical reality, it cannot functionally cohere with the resting matter around it in a stable, structural way.
Oh, wow.
It is, by the essay's definition, a massive scale of incoherence. It is a snapped rubber band shooting across the cosmos.
That is just staggering. The very light that illuminates our universe is the byproduct of an extreme phase change.
Yes.
It is an artifact of the engine redlining. I need to ground this. My brain is bending a little too far into quantum theory here.
Yeah.
Let me try an analogy to see if I actually understand the mechanics of these limit cycles and phase changes. I'm thinking about water.
Water is an excellent analog for phase changes. Let's hear it.
Okay, think about a pot of water on a stove. When you heat water, you're adding energy. The water molecules start expanding outward.
They're cohering with the air, becoming less dense, vibrating faster.
Right. Eventually, they hit the absolute boundary of that specific limit cycle, the boiling point. A phase change happens.
And it becomes steam.
Exactly. It's no longer liquid water. It's steam. It has fundamentally changed its physical properties because it pushed past the extreme edge of outward expansion.
Perfect. The steam is a phase change caused by extreme outward momentum.
And on the other side, if you take that water and put it in a freezer, you're cooling it. The molecules pull inward, they decohere from their chaotic environment and begin to cohere internally,
Pulling tightly together.
becoming denser and denser. Eventually, they hit the other limit cycle, the freezing point. Another phase change occurs. The liquid becomes ice. It becomes a crystal. It becomes rigid.
That is a brilliant way to visualize the mechanics of it. Water, ice, and steam are all the exact same foundational substrate H2O.
The actual stuff hasn't changed at all.
But its behavior, its physical properties, and its interaction with the world change completely based on where it is in the limit cycle of temperature and pressure.
And what this text is arguing is that everything in the universe operates this exact way, just on a cosmic, multidimensional scale.
Exactly. It fundamentally changes how we are supposed to view death, decay, and transformation.
Right, because if entropy is just steam and crystallization is just ice, then neither of them are evil.
The text insists passionately that we should not view entropy or death as negatives that maliciously break down the universe. They are a required, mathematical part of the cycle.
This is perhaps the most vital, actionable takeaway for you, the listener, to internalize. Think about what happens if we don't have entropy, according to this theoretical model. What if we somehow defeated decay?
Right? What if we just kept expanding infinitely, cohering outward forever without ever dissolving, resting, or decaying?
Yes. The text argues that that scenario would be the true, horrifying death of the universe.
Because it would just be an infinite, endless stretching until everything is completely meaningless and disconnected.
It would be like a balloon blown up so huge that the rubber stretches until it is just a single lonely atom thick and then nothing.
Precisely. Decay, death, fading away, the crumbling of old structures. These are the vital mechanisms that allow the system to dissolve back into the substrate so that new, entirely different combinations can occur.
It's the recycling program of the universe's material.
Without that phase change at the edge of the outward expansion, the engine runs out of fuel. It gets stuck. The things that fade away and the things that combine and change work together in this massive friction to help the overall system become more complex.
Which raises a huge, glowing, almost tragic question about human nature.
Oh, definitely.
If decay, combining, phase changes, breaking down, and the shifting of seasons are absolutely mathematically necessary for the universe to function, why do human beings try so desperately to freeze things exactly as they are?
It's what we do best.
Why are we so obsessed with permanence?
That question leads us right into the most common pitfall of human society. This is what we can call the complexity trap.
The complexity trap. Here is where the essay gets really interesting in its application to our daily lives. The text makes a very clear, sharp distinction.
Complexity and coherence are not the same thing.
Right, they are not the same thing.
It's an incredibly easy mistake to make, and we make it constantly in our institutions. We assume that if a system is highly coherent, if it's highly organized, structured, and aligned, it is automatically a highly complex system.
But the author gives a brilliant counterexample to shatter this assumption: a laser.
Yes, a laser beam. Let's really dig into this because this analogy is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
It really is. A laser is incredibly coherent. That is literally its defining property. All the light waves inside a laser beam are marching in exact mathematical lockstep.
They share the same frequency, they're in phase, and they're pointing in the exact same direction.
Is perfectly aligned order.
It is absolute coherence. But is it complex?
No. It is profoundly mathematically simple. There is almost zero complexity in a laser beam moving through a vacuum.
Exactly. Complexity doesn't arise from things just marching in a straight line. It doesn't come from perfect, unbroken order.
Where does it come from, then?
Complexity, according to the text, only grows because of the forward and backward momentum of the limit cycle. It grows from the friction, the exchange, the constant cohering and decohering interacting with each other. It requires the messy shifting of phases.
So to make that laser beam complex, you have to break its coherence.
Yes.
You need the laser to hit a prism, to scatter into a spectrum. You need it to reflect off distorted mirrors, to interact with smoke in the air, to cast shadows. You actually need it to decohere and interact with its environment to create a complex light show.
Perfect order is just a straight line. To use another analogy, true complexity is a rainforest, not a laser beam.
Oh, I love that. Unpack the rainforest for me.
Think about the floor of a rainforest. It looks chaotic, but it is the pinnacle of biological complexity. A rainforest is constantly growing, cohering, vines reaching up, canopies expanding.
Right, lots of growth.
But it's also constantly dying and decaying.
Wow.
Leaves fall, rot, and decohere into the soil. Fungi break down dead wood.
It's messy.
It is the constant fierce interplay of life and death, of outward expansion and inward decay, of cohering and decohering that creates the immense resilient complexity of the ecosystem.
If you remove decay from the rainforest, it would choke on its own dead material and die.
Exactly.
So why do we humans constantly try to turn our rainforests into lasers? Because we do this with everything. We build corporate institutions and try to make them permanent and perfectly predictable.
We do.
We get into a romantic relationship and we want it to feel exactly the same, mathematically identical on day 10,000 as it did on day 10. We are terrified of the leaves falling. We are terrified of things crumbling or shifting, so we try to freeze them in place.
And that desire for permanence is a massive trap.
Why does the text say it's a trap?
Because incoherence, specifically the rigidity form of incoherence, the crystallization we discussed earlier, freezes complexity exactly where it is.
Oh.
If you try to stabilize a system purely out of fear, if you try to freeze the rainforest so nothing ever dies and nothing ever rots, you halt the limit cycle. You stop the breathing engine.
You crystallize it.
Exactly. You cannot increase complexity by freezing a system. If you freeze it, you actively destroy the ability for those complex nodes to interact with each other. You isolate the nodes in ice.
The reality of the universe is that we need things to change. We need the forward and backward momentum. The engine fundamentally requires fluidity.
It makes me think of massive empires throughout history or even giant monopolistic corporate structures today. Let's use a tech giant as a hypothetical.
Okay, the tech giant.
They almost always start as these dynamic, fluid networks.
Yeah.
A few people in a garage, cohering and decohering, sharing crazy ideas, pivoting constantly. They embrace the friction.
They build a highly complex adaptive system.
But then they get huge, and fear sets in. The fear of losing market share, the fear of instability, the fear of the stock price dropping.
And how do they react to that fear?
They start adding rigid rules, endless bureaucracy, strict top-down hierarchies. They try to freeze the system to preserve their dominance. They want to turn their messy, creative rainforest into a perfectly predictable laser beam.
And what always happens? The company crystallizes. It becomes completely incapable of adapting to new information. It can't innovate. And eventually, a newer, more fluid system shatters it.
It is the ultimate paradox of human control. By trying to permanently secure a complex system, by trying to outlaw the winter and the decay, you enforce an artificial rigidity that inherently destroys the system's ability to actually be complex.
The text is basically shouting a warning at us. Our anxiety-driven desire for permanence is actually driving us toward the very incoherence we are so desperately trying to avoid.
You have to let it breathe. You have to let the system breathe in and breathe out. Let the leaves fall.
But this brings up a massive mechanical question for me.
Hey, let's hear it.
If everything is just this endless repetitive cycle of breathing in and out, cohering and decohering, expanding and contracting, what keeps it going anywhere? Why doesn't the universe just get stuck in a perfect loop? Why doesn't it just wind down like a spinning top? Or hell, why doesn't it run backward?
That is the perfect transition to the final and arguably most beautiful concept in the text. To keep this massive engine running smoothly, to prevent it from just oscillating in a meaningless closed loop, there's one final, incredibly elegant mechanism at play.
What's the mechanism?
The text calls it the forward imbalance of time.
The forward imbalance. The source states that the universe does not reverse in time, nor does it stop and eventually find a static, perfect, frozen balance, because coherence, the outward summer element of the cycle, has a slightly higher calculated weight than decoherence.
Okay, let's stop and really look at that, because this is a staggering philosophical and physical statement.
It really is.
The author is suggesting that the fundamental deck of the universe is slightly stacked. It is stacked in favor of growth, in favor of outward expression, in favor of coherence.
I need to understand this calculated weight mechanism. Is it like a literal mathematical probability? Like a cosmic roulette wheel, where the green 00 gives the house a slight, inescapable edge over time. Except in this case, the house is the expansion of existence itself.
That roulette wheel is a fantastic analogy.
Yeah.
Yes, think of it as a microscopic statistical advantage baked into the fabric of the substrate. Because coherence has a slightly higher weight or probability than decoherence, every single time the universe breathes in and breathes out, it doesn't return to the exact same starting point.
The piston doesn't return to the exact same millimeter.
Right. It moves slightly forward, it iterates. That tiny calculated imbalance, that microscopic house edge, is what actually creates the arrow of time.
It's what prevents the universe from just being a pendulum swinging back and forth in a void forever.
Yes. It ensures that every cycle of the limit cycle, every season of the universe, actually generates new complexity, rather than just repeating the old complexity on an endless, maddening loop.
It is the engine of novelty.
It is. And this underlying mechanical reality leads to the ultimate conclusion of the text, which carries immense, sweeping philosophical weight.
What's the conclusion?
Based on this entire framework of limit cycles and imbalances, the author states plainly that there are no laws in the universe.
Right. Laws imply they can be broken, and they cannot. That specific line hit me incredibly hard. It feels so liberating, but also terrifying.
It is meant to be liberating because it forces us to discard our incredibly arrogant, human, legalistic view of reality. The universe doesn't have a constitution.
Right. There isn't a cosmic courthouse where particles are forced, under threat of punishment, to obey the speed limit of light or the second law of thermodynamics.
The universe simply is.
It just is.
Exactly. It is, fractally, a limit cycle at every single level. From the quantum foam to the galactic superclusters, the behaviors we observe and write textbooks about gravity, thermodynamics, quantum mechanics, these aren't laws being enforced from the top down.
They're just descriptions.
They are simply our human, localized descriptions of how this massive breathing engine operates as it naturally shifts through its phases based on its own internal pressures.
And because it's all the exact same fractal engine, the exact same limit cycle playing out at different scales, the text makes another massive paradigm-shattering leap. There is absolutely no fundamental distinction between life and matter.
I'll quote the text directly here, because it is vital. There is no life and just matter. We are all made from the same stuff. There's merely energy forming new complexity.
It's an incredibly unifying thought. You, me, the microphone I'm speaking into, the listener sitting in their car, their living room, the biological soup inside the chrysalis, the star going supernova a billion light years away. We aren't fundamentally different categories of existence.
We aren't.
The universe isn't divided into dead stuff and alive stuff. We are all just the exact same foundational substrate, caught in different localized limit cycles of cohering and decohering. We are all just energy that has temporarily formed into specific, breathtaking complexities.
We are just the universe experiencing itself at a specific scale. And this deeply unifying realization is what brings us to the author's palpable frustration at the very end of the text.
Yeah, you can really feel it.
They note, almost with a sigh, how humans constantly, obsessively try to overcomplicate this reality. We build massive, dense academic frameworks, we invent impenetrable jargon, we create these towering intellectual structures to try and explain reality, when the core reality is actually startlingly simple.
I really felt that frustration reading the conclusion. The author basically says, look, a grand unifying theory of the universe doesn't need big, fancy, intimidating words.
It doesn't need a chalkboard full of Greek symbols that only 10 people on Earth can read.
Exactly. It's an engine. It breathes in, it breathes out, it has boundaries, and it shifts phases when it hits them. It is profoundly simple.
But the author points out why we overcomplicate it. The reason we struggle to see this beautiful simplicity isn't a lack of human intelligence.
We aren't too stupid to see it.
No, it is fear.
Yeah.
It is anxiety. It is the restrictive social taboos and artificial constructs we've built to protect our fragile egos.
Right. We are so utterly terrified of our winter selves. We are so afraid of entropy, of aging, of decay.
We are so terrified of the system breaking down and our sandcastle washing away that we put on intellectual blinders.
We create rigid, crystallized ideologies and complex laws to make ourselves feel like we are in control, to make ourselves feel safe. And in doing so, we blind ourselves to the simple breathing engine that is actually running everything.
We use complexity as a shield against the truth.
That is so well said. The ultimate intellectual breakthrough, the real moment of enlightenment, isn't always learning a new, infinitely dense mathematical formula.
Often it's not.
Sometimes the real breakthrough is psychological. It's stripping away our human anxieties, our need for control, and our fear of the winter, so we can finally just see the simple fractal engine operating underneath all the noise.
Exactly.
That is a lot to process. We've gone from the anxiety of daily life to the fundamental thermodynamics of the universe, and back again.
It's a journey.
So, if you are listening to this right now and you're trying to synthesize all this dense theory, this grand cosmic view, back down to your actual everyday life, here are the essential takeaways we want you to hold on to. First, and perhaps most importantly, do not fear your winter self.
Absolutely. That is huge.
When you feel that deep structural need to pull back, to go inward, to rest, you aren't failing. You are building internal coherence. Understand that coherence and decoherence, summer and winter, are just the necessary mathematical breathing of the universe.
Without the out-breath, there is no in-breath.
Yeah.
Without the decaying leaves, there is no rainforest. Without decay, there is no complexity.
And remember to identify the true enemy. You aren't fighting against time, and you aren't fighting against decay. The only actual enemy you are fighting against is incoherence.
Right.
It is the artificial scarcity that tells you there isn't enough, which snaps your connections to others. It is the fear of the unknown that forces your mind into a rigid, unyielding crystal.
Those are the actual forces that stop your personal evolution and our societal progress.
Exactly. Don't try to freeze the rainforest just because you're terrified that a single tree might fall. The falling tree, the decomposition, the phase change, that is the engine running exactly as it should.
Which leaves us with a deeply resonant, slightly challenging question, inspired directly by this entire framework.
What's the question?
We want you to think about this as you go about your day. If the universe simply is a fluid, breathing limit cycle, And the rigid laws we create for ourselves are so often just anxious, desperate attempts to freeze complexity out of fear of change. What fundamental law in your own life are you holding on to out of pure fear?
Wow. That is a heavy question to sit with. What rule have I made for myself just because I'm terrified of the winter?
Exactly. And the follow-up is this. What beautiful, incredibly necessary phase change might finally happen if you just let that fear go, stop trying to freeze the system, and allow this cycle to continue?
Remember what we talked about at the very beginning, our desire for the universe to be a simple machine?
Hmm.
We constantly want clean, binary, black and white answers. We want to be able to x-ray our lives and pinpoint exactly what is broken so we can cast it in plaster and fix it permanently.
But maybe we don't need to fix the engine.
Maybe we just need to realize we aren't looking at a broken bone that needs a cast. We're looking at a river. And you can't x-ray a river, and you certainly can't freeze it without killing what lives inside it. You just have to learn how to swim.